Samantha Reed was not the kind of person who often took time for herself. As a nurse in one of Chicago's busiest hospitals, she spent most of her days moving from one patient to another, rarely stopping to rest or even eat properly. The last few weeks had been especially tough. Double shifts, emergencies, and sleepless nights had left her exhausted both in body and mind. So when her manager finally approved a few days off, she decided to take a short trip to New York, a city she loved but hadn't visited in years. That morning, the sky over Chicago was bright but cold. Samantha arrived at the airport with her small suitcase and a cup of coffee she didn't even finish. The terminal buzzed with life. Travelers hurrying through security, children tugging at their parents' hands, announcements echoing from every corner. It was just another day of people coming and going, all carrying their own stories. She found her gate, waited quietly, and boarded Flight 247, bound for New York. It was an ordinary domestic flight, the kind she had taken many times before. She found her seat, 7th seat on the aisle near the front. It was a comfortable spot, close enough to the exit, and she smiled when the flight attendant offered her a friendly greeting. Samantha responded with a polite nod, too tired to say much. As the plane filled up, she noticed the other passengers around her. Across the aisle, a man in a business suit typed on his laptop, clearly preparing for a meeting. In front of her, an older couple were sharing a crossword puzzle, laughing quietly as they tried to solve the clues together. Behind her, a mother was soothing her baby, humming softly to keep it calm. Everything seemed peaceful, just another ordinary flight with ordinary people. Samantha leaned her head against the window and let out a long sigh. The hum of the engines was oddly comforting. It reminded her of the sound of rain, steady, constant, and somehow calming. She had always liked flying. There was something freeing about being up in the sky, far above the noise of the world. Once the plane lifted off the ground, she closed her eyes. Her thoughts drifted to her father, a small-town pilot who used to take her flying when she was a child. He had taught her how to read the basic instruments, how to stay calm even when the plane shook a little, and how to always trust the process. He used to say, "The sky is like life, Sam. You can't control the wind, but you can control your wings." Those words had stayed with her long after he passed away. As the plane climbed higher, Samantha's tiredness took over. She pulled the blanket the attendant had given her and dozed off, her mind slowly fading into a dream. The soft vibration of the engines lulled her into a deep, peaceful sleep. About 45 minutes later, a sudden jolt woke her up. The plane trembled slightly as it hit a pocket of turbulence. Her heart skipped for a moment, but she quickly reminded herself that it was normal. The captain's calm voice came through the speaker, explaining that they were just passing through a rough air patch and there was nothing to worry about. The passengers relaxed, and Samantha smiled faintly before leaning back again. The air settled. Drinks were served, and laughter filled the aisles again. The man across from her ordered black coffee, and the child behind her giggled as his mother showed him how to fold a paper airplane. The world inside that cabin felt safe, small, warm, and far away from all worries. But just as Samantha began to close her eyes again, the mood changed. The calm hum of conversation slowly faded when the captain's voice returned to the intercom. This time his tone was not calm. It was strained, shaky, and unsure. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice said after a short pause, "we have a situation." The words hung heavy in the air. Every head lifted. The sound of plastic cups and pages turning stopped at once. Even the flight attendants froze for a second. The captain continued, "If there is anyone on board with flight experience, please press your call button immediately." Samantha's eyes widened in disbelief. Did she hear that right? Flight experience? What could that mean? She turned toward the window, her heart beginning to beat faster. The passengers around her exchanged anxious looks. "What did he say?" asked a woman in the next row, her voice shaking. The businessman across the aisle muttered, "He said they need someone who can fly a plane." "Right?" The tension grew like a wave moving through the cabin. A flight attendant hurried up the aisle, her face pale but calm as she spoke quietly into her radio. A few people pressed their call buttons, probably out of confusion, but no one stood up. Samantha's pulse raced. A part of her wanted to believe it was just some kind of misunderstanding, maybe an exercise or a technical message gone wrong. But deep down, she knew the tone of that voice. It was not an error. It was fear hidden behind control. The same tone she'd heard in emergency rooms when doctors had to stay calm no matter what happened. She looked toward the cockpit door at the front of the plane. It was closed, silent. The hum of the engine sounded louder now, like an uneasy heartbeat running through the metal walls. Minutes passed slowly. The flight attendants whispered among themselves, their hands shaking as they moved between seats. Samantha tried to steady her breathing, telling herself to stay calm. The passengers around her were growing restless. Someone began to cry quietly. Her training as a nurse told her to observe before reacting, so she watched carefully. One of the attendants came back from the cockpit, tears in her eyes, but she quickly composed herself. She took a deep breath and smiled weakly at the passengers, trying to reassure them. "Everything is under control," she said softly. But her trembling hands said otherwise. Samantha's mind was racing now. She thought about her father again, about how he had once told her that panic was a pilot's greatest enemy. "Fear makes your hands shake, and a shaking hand can't hold the yoke steady," he had said. The air in the cabin felt heavy. The man in the business suit shut his laptop. The older couple in front held hands tightly. The mother behind her hugged her baby closer, whispering soothing words. It was like time had slowed down, everyone waiting for the next announcement. Then the captain's voice came again, softer but more urgent this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are managing the situation. I repeat, if there is anyone on board with flying experience, not even basic, please identify yourself to a crew member." The murmurs began again. "Is this for real?" someone whispered. "What's going on?" another asked. Samantha's hands were clenched together, her palms damp with sweat. She felt a strange mix of fear and memory rising inside her. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head, calm and steady. "You'll never know when life will ask you to step up, Sam. But when it does, don't run from it." The cabin lights flickered slightly as the plane adjusted its altitude. Samantha looked out of the window. Endless white clouds stretched below, glowing faintly in the sunlight. Somewhere far beneath them was the world, normal and steady. Up here, time felt suspended. A flight attendant passed by, checking on passengers. Samantha caught her arm gently. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Is everything okay?" The woman's eyes darted nervously, then she gave a forced smile. "The captain's handling it," she said. But Samantha could see through it. She recognized the kind of calm that came from trying to hide panic. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. The flight attendant finally whispered, "The co-pilot. He's sick. The captain's trying to control the plane alone." Then she quickly walked away before anyone else could hear. Samantha sat frozen, the words repeated in her head. The co-pilot was sick. One pilot, 150 lives, 30,000 feet in the air. She didn't know what to do yet, but she could feel it. That familiar pull in her chest that always came when someone needed help. She was a nurse. Helping people was what she did every day, but this was different. This was the sky, not a hospital. Still, her instincts were waking up. She sat straighter, her eyes on the cockpit door again. Her heart was pounding, but her breathing slowed. She could almost see her father's hands guiding hers on the yoke of the small Cessna years ago. She remembered how he smiled at her confidence and told her she had a pilot's calm. Now sitting in seat 7C, she didn't feel calm, not yet. But something inside her whispered that maybe she was meant to be here, on this exact flight at this exact moment. The plane flew on through the bright sky, steady but uncertain. No one knew what would happen next. Samantha could feel the weight of the silence pressing down. A silence filled with fear, hope, and questions that had no answers yet. As she sat there, staring at the cockpit door, she made a silent promise to herself. If there was anything she could do, anything at all, she wouldn't hesitate. She didn't know it yet, but in less than an hour, that promise would change everything, and for now, all she could do was wait, her eyes fixed on the small, closed door at the front of the plane, wondering what awaited beyond it. The air inside the cabin had turned heavy with fear and silence. People whispered, prayed quietly, or simply sat frozen in their seats. Samantha's hands rested on her knees, but her mind was far from calm. She could still hear the captain's voice echoing in her head. "If there's anyone on board with flight experience," the words wouldn't stop repeating. Her heart beat faster as she thought about the co-pilot being sick, the captain struggling alone, and all those lives depending on a single pair of hands in that small cockpit. She tried to think clearly, but questions crowded her thoughts. Could she really help? Would she make things worse? What if she froze at the wrong moment? Her father's voice seemed to whisper through the noise of her mind. Don't overthink, Sam. When someone needs help, you step forward first. You can think later. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached up and pressed the call button. A flight attendant appeared almost instantly, her face pale but hopeful. Ma'am, do you have flying experience? She asked in a quiet, urgent voice. Samantha took a deep breath. A little, she admitted. Not commercial, small aircraft. My father was a pilot. I've flown with him many times. I know the basics. The attendant's eyes widened in relief and disbelief. Please come with me, she said, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. Passengers turned their heads as Samantha stood up, clutching the armrest for balance. Every pair of eyes seemed to follow her as she walked down the aisle toward the cockpit. She could hear soft murmurs, people wondering who she was, hoping she might help, afraid of what might come next. The older couple in front of her gave her a small nod of encouragement. Someone whispered a prayer as she passed. At the front, the flight attendant opened the cockpit door slightly and spoke to the captain. Samantha could hear faint beeping and the low hum of machinery inside. Then the door opened wider and she stepped in. The cockpit felt smaller than she imagined, filled with blinking lights, switches, and glowing screens. The air smelled faintly of metal and coffee. The captain turned his head, his eyes tired but alert. He looked relieved to see her. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice steady but strained. I'm Captain Lewis. My first officer collapsed about 10 minutes ago. I've put the plane on autopilot. But we're having navigation issues. Are you familiar with flight controls? Samantha nodded cautiously. Yes, sir. I've flown small aircraft and a Cessna years ago. I know how to read basic instruments and keep the plane level. That's good, he said quickly. Right now I need an extra pair of hands. The system isn't responding properly and I'm in contact with air traffic control. Just follow my instructions and we'll get through this. She took the empty co-pilot seat beside him. For a brief second she froze, staring at the endless clouds outside the window, the horizon far below, and the maze of buttons in front of her. Then she took a deep breath and rested her hands near the controls, careful not to touch anything yet. The captain's voice came calmly. Okay, watch the altitude here, he said, pointing to a circular gauge. If it dips, we need to pull slightly on the yoke. Gently, no sudden moves. Keep an eye on the horizon indicator. If it tilts, tell me. Samantha nodded, her eyes following every movement. Her mind sharpened. The fear that had filled her moments ago was replaced by quiet focus. The same calm she used to feel in the hospital when things got critical. Minutes passed. The captain communicated with air traffic control through his headset, relaying information while Samantha kept her eyes on the instruments. Occasionally, he asked her to adjust a control or read a number aloud. Her steady voice seemed to calm him. Back in the cabin, people waited in tense silence. Every small sound, a creak, a beep, a shift in air, what made them look up. But knowing that someone had stepped in gave them a small spark of hope. The flight attendants did their best to comfort passengers, though their own hands still trembled slightly. Inside the cockpit, the captain began to breathe easier. You're doing great, he said after a while, glancing at Samantha. How are you feeling? She managed a small smile. A little scared, she admitted, but I'm okay. Just tell me what to do. He nodded. That's all I need. They worked side by side, adjusting the controls as the plane approached a safer altitude. The radio crackled as the ground crew guided them toward an emergency landing route. You're cleared to approach runway 18, a calm voice said through the speaker. Maintain current altitude and heading. We'll have medical assistance waiting. The captain turned to Samantha. We're going to land in about 30 minutes, he said. I'll need you to help me monitor speed and angle. We have to make sure the descent is smooth. She took a deep breath and nodded again. Her heart was beating fast, but she focused only on the captain's instructions and the instruments in front of her. Outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the cockpit in a soft golden glow. As they began their descent, the plane shook slightly. The captain adjusted the throttle, and Samantha read out the numbers as he asked. Altitude steady. Speed normal, she said in a low voice, trying to keep calm. The captain smiled faintly. You sound like a natural co-pilot. She let out a nervous laugh. My dad would have loved to hear that. The next few minutes were the longest of her life. Every small movement mattered. Every word counted. The airport came into view, a long stretch of concrete surrounded by emergency vehicles waiting at the edges. The passengers could now feel the descent. Some began to pray, others held hands tightly, and a few closed their eyes. Samantha kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. "We're level," she said. "Good," replied the captain. "Flaps down." She followed his instruction, moving the lever carefully just as he showed her. The plane adjusted smoothly. "Landing gear," he said next. "Down and locked," she confirmed, her voice firm. The airport was now larger, clearer. The runway stretched ahead like a silver ribbon. The captain's voice stayed calm, but his hands were tight on the controls. "You're doing great," he said again. "Almost there." Samantha felt sweat on her palms but didn't dare move. The ground grew closer. She could now see the tiny airport buildings, the vehicles, even people waiting near the edge. "Speed?" the captain asked. "Stable," she answered. "Hold it steady. Steady." The sound of the landing gear meeting the runway filled the cabin. A heavy thump followed by the roar of the brakes. The plane shuddered slightly but remained straight, slowing down gradually until it rolled to a full stop. There was a brief, perfect silence. Then, from behind the cockpit door, a wave of applause and cheers erupted. People clapped, cried, and shouted with relief. Samantha exhaled, realizing only then that she had been holding her breath. The captain removed his headset and turned to her with a tired smile. "You just helped me land this plane," he said softly. "You saved everyone on board." Samantha shook her head, still dazed. "I just did what I could," she said quietly. "You did the real work," he smiled again. "Sometimes courage is the hardest work of all." As they stepped out of the cockpit, the passengers watched in awe. The first thing Samantha saw was the faces. Tearful, smiling, grateful faces. Some people clapped harder when they saw her. A child waved at her and an older woman whispered, "Thank you, dear." The moment felt unreal. The sunlight streamed through the windows, and the sound of sirens echoed faintly outside as medical teams came to assist the co-pilot, who was now awake and being helped by paramedics. One of the flight attendants hugged Samantha briefly. "You were amazing," she whispered. "I don't know how you stayed so calm." Samantha smiled softly. "I didn't feel calm," she said. "I just remembered what my dad used to tell me. When things feel out of control, breathe and focus on what you can do next." Later, as the passengers disembarked, many stopped to thank her. Some shook her hand. Others just smiled with tears in their eyes. She wasn't used to attention, nurses rarely were, but in that moment, she understood something her father had always believed. Sometimes the quietest people are the ones who make the loudest difference. When the crowd thinned and the noise faded, Captain Lewis approached her again. His uniform was slightly wrinkled and there were tired lines around his eyes, but his expression was full of gratitude. "You handled yourself like a professional," he said. "You could have stayed in your seat, but you didn't. You stepped up. That takes real heart." Samantha didn't know what to say. She simply smiled. "I think my dad would have told me to get up," she said softly. He nodded. Wherever he is, he'd be proud. Outside, the evening sun painted the sky orange and gold. The cool breeze carried the smell of jet fuel and fresh rain. Samantha stood near the exit of the plane, looking out at the runway. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thanks, Dad." Her journey to New York had turned into something no one could have imagined. A flight that tested her courage, her memory, and her heart. She had boarded that plane as a tired nurse looking for rest, but she walked off as a quiet hero who proved that sometimes ordinary people can do extraordinary things when the moment asks for it. As she walked down the steps toward the waiting shuttle, a little girl ran up and handed her a small drawing, a stick figure flying a plane with the words "Thank you" written above it. Samantha smiled, tears filling her eyes. She bent down and said softly, "Keep that bravery in your heart too, okay?" The girl nodded, grinning shyly. When Samantha finally reached her hotel later,